Hi, Brit.
Hi, Christian.
Welcome to the Superhuman Mind blog.
Hi. Good to talk to you.
So today we were thinking about talking about intelligence and how you measure it. So the
Yeah,
traditional method has been that everybody seems to be pretty familiar with is the IQ, the intelligence quotient, the IQ test. And how does a standard IQ test work?
a standard IQ test. Well, it's composed of components that sort of match your age. So an IQ test for a child would be different from an IQ test for an adult, and so it has certain the standard test that you give to adults will have certain problem solving tasks on it, and also visual tasks where, for instance, you have to say which of could have like squares, different, not squares, but different shapes, and you might say like which ones can you rotate and match onto other shapes and so on. So you basically have these problem solving questions that are based on a sense of spatial orientation, a sense of logic and problem solving skills, and some math skills, maybe some English comprehension skills, depending on which tests. So there are different IQ tests out there, and basically you take so the average of all the people who take the tests. You take the average and you make that 100, and then you measure everyone else relative to the average. So the average has to be 100. So if the human intelligence goes up overall, then 100 will be at a higher level. Or if we become dumber as a species, then 100 will be at a lower level. And so when you're significantly above 100, then you're considered smart. And if you're significantly below 100, then you're considered not smart, according to, or not intelligent, according to the IQ test. So what are some of the problems with that?
Well, I mean, I know they've shown that it can be your IQ can vary, for example, depending on your native language. So it's very hard to measure to compare individuals across different languages, even using some of the same concepts, because um, those concepts might be less familiar in one language or more familiar. Um,
Yeah,
so that's been one particular problem. I know another major problem is that uh, it's the some of the items they use to measure what they call intelligence is not necessarily what you think about as being intelligence, right?
right,
So for
right.
a child to be able to uh, you know place blocks in the correct spaces, or for someone to be able to draw the other side of an object, um, doesn't necessarily always lock on to someone's uh, intelligent, some other domain of intelligence that someone might be really proficient in, like painting or um, uh, writing or mathematics.
Yeah, or even creativity, right? So you don't have to be particularly creative or original, or you don't have to be able to come up with new ideas to score really well on an IQ test.
Right. Um,
And yeah, and it doesn't it also doesn't measure up with the success that people have in life often.
mhm.
So there there are lots of examples of um, homeless people who earlier on in life have had an IQ that is above 130,
Mhm.
which is considered pretty pretty high, fairly high. And so there's some studies that show that there's not like a correlation between whether you're successful in life and your IQ. So it may be that your IQ sort of give you a certain what you say, piece in the puzzle, and if you have the other pieces as well, then it will overall help you. But that by itself is not sort of doesn't correlate with whether you're successful in life. So so a lot of people who are successful actually have much lower IQ because they don't. Well, a lot of people, of course, don't measure their IQ, but those who do get their IQs measured, a lot of them have actually a much more successful, better in businesses, better in just making money, or having a stable,
Hmm.
private economy and so on.
So I'm sure a lot of people aren't really familiar with what the IQ test really even is used for, because some people, of course, there's these online kind of check your own IQ tests, but a lot of times they're given in psychology and neuroscience research as a way to establish a baseline or to weed out certain people that you think may not be candidates for a study.
Yeah.
Um, so, do you think that that's a good test to incorporate in when you're trying to find research participants, or is because of the problems we just talked about, is it really not that useful of a measure in research?
Yeah, I don't think it's very useful. Another way it's also used is in schools.
Hmm.
So in elementary school, in order to get in the honors program or the gifted program or whatever people call it in the particular school, you take your kid to some testing place, which could be a public testing place or a private psychiatrist who's doing these kinds of tests, and then if it's above, usually it's at 130 is like the mark, where if the kid scores above 130, they get into the gifted program or the honors program,
Hmm.
and if they don't, then they don't get into it.
Right.
Um, and and in some ways, it's a very narrow way of measuring whether that kid actually be gifted in school, right?
Hmm.
Or a participant or should be a participant in an honors program.
Right.
So it's a very so it's very little kids. They use blocks and things like that, but it's basically the same principle where you have to match certain things into other things, um, and and it measures a certain kind of almost spatial intelligence, right? A lot of it. Well, some of it is sort of problem solving, but problem solving in a more narrow sense,
Hmm.
sort of the kind of problem
Spatialist.
solving that you see in a logic course or something like
Right.
that.
And spatial problem solving really does not have a correlation to abilities in many other domains, right? So you can be totally spatially inept, but
Right,
still be a prolific writer or a painter, or I mean, you don't have to be able to visualize three-dimensional space to
right,
perform a lot of very high intelligence job functions. Um,
right.
but then there's some I know that it might be important. So, for example, on the dental admissions test that people take to get into dental school, there's a whole spatial aspect of that exam where you have to match angle, you have to compare angle sizes, things like that. And the theory behind that is in that particular skills, you need that particular skill set to do the type of work that a dentist does. Um,
Right, right. So there might be more use for the tests that are used to get into different kinds of schools, like law school or med school or graduate school. They might be better sort of test of the individual's abilities.
and I know, in my experience, another place they often use IQ test is when, in the legal world, when they're trying to determine whether someone's capable of giving consent for something, especially when you have when you're testing for incompetency of a of a child or an emancipated minor or even an adult who isn't you're not sure if they're capable mentally of giving consent for, like, for example, medical procedures, things like that. And but one of the problems I see is that psychologists will use an IQ test and they'll rely on that in their analysis to say that the person either clearly can give consent or can't.
Yeah.
But when you if you sit down with the individual, it's clear that the IQ test does not reflect their abilities. I mean, sometimes their IQ is below average, but not in the concerning, it's not a concerning number. But then the person clearly is not capable of um, providing consent. I mean, on any day. Um, so that's another area that it's I think it can do some damage. Um, so what
Yeah.
so how so people are interested in measuring intelligence. I mean, for some of the reasons we just mentioned. And so, what are some of the newer methods that get away from those problems?
Yeah, so there is at least some areas where people are testing for things like emotional intelligence.
Mm.
Um, and so an example is in one of the departments that is sort of dealing with at our university that is dealing with sort of it's kind of publicity promotion department for the university.
Mm.
And when they before they're hired, they actually get like an emotional intelligence test. So that's fairly common. So your emotional intelligence is completely different, right,
Right.
from your IQ. So um, that might tell a lot more about a person. A personality test as well
Mm.
might tell more about a person than an IQ test, especially if you're trying to hire a person.
Right.
That it might be better to give them a personality test or um, emotional intelligence test than an IQ test.
Right. Or these more logic specific ones can be good for certain jobs that where you don't need the person to have emotional intelligence. You just need them to
Right,
to program the thing, right?
right.
Um, and that makes sense because we often with people we know, when we say the person's really intelligent, we rarely mean they're that they have a high IQ, right? we
No,
mean
really.
we mean that they have high emotional intelligence or high. We're usually talking about a domain as kind of in brackets when we're saying that.
A domain like a skill that where they're really good, or or they're just like overall they have like a lot of general knowledge about a lot of
Right.
things. So if they, someone who would be really good at trivia, might we might think, oh, that person is like really smart, right?
Right.
So, and yet that person might score really low on an IQ
Mm.
test. So, sort
Right.
of a lot of general knowledge, like factual knowledge.
So do you think that so if we do have different domains of intelligence, do you think that some domains are you're more proficient in some domains at the expense of others, or do you think it's possible that there's some people who have high intelligence across all domains? Um,
I mean, it's rare, right? The supposedly cases of that in history. I
mhm.
mean, if you go back, so it seems that Aristotle was pretty much like intelligent in all areas
Right.
of his time, at least all academic areas.
Right.
But I'm not sure about his athletic skills, for instance, but or his creative
Mhm.
skill. But the other, I mean, lots of other historical cases of people who seem to have this kind of like remarkable abilities across the board, where they're fantastic painters and fantastic mathematicians at the same time, or whatever.
Right.
Um, but in general, I think that people have certain abilities, and that it's yeah, it does obviously cost something to be good at something, right? So when you become really good in one domain, you study in other domains less. You can't. You only have a certain number of hours in a day and
Right.
a certain kind of like attention span. So I think normally it's very domain specific, and
Okay.
it has a lot
Yeah.
to do with what your interests are, right? So if you have no interest in a particular domain, it's going to be really hard to actually man up to the job and become good at it.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, so maybe we should have like a whole range of IQ tests that
Right.
was sort of domain specific.
Right. So I wonder that maybe there's a way to do that, and then I think that you still wouldn't want to kind of put them all together, though. I think it would be more useful to an individual to know their kind of individual domains, because then you could maybe work on one if you really are trying to improve one of them. Uh,
Yeah,
kind of measure them separately that way. Well, all
right.
right. Well, I think this was an interesting topic.
Yeah, very interesting topic.
All right, we'll
So
see you
we'll
next week.
talk next week.
All right.